the contents of the board diary be read to the jury?
Say that again?
The questions that I asked in the board diary, may they be read to the jury?
Sure.
Officer Foster, you said you were patrolling the road the night of the accident.
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor. In pretrial matters, we were instructed that objections would be within their shot of the jury. Seems like a waste of the court's time to go back through the same questions.
Yeah, I agree.
Your Honor, I'm not going through the questions again.
Yeah, I follow you. Thank you.
Officer Foster, you were patrolling the road the night of the accident,
Yes, I was.
and you said you didn't pull over the car when you first saw it.
Yes, as I was doing that, another call came in and I had to respond because it was an officer requesting my presence.
Officer Foster, now, you're an officer of the law.
Yes, I was, and the procedure is when a call comes in and an officer requests your help, that takes precedent over traffic stops.
But that's not why you didn't stop the car.
That is why I didn't stop the call. I had another call coming in.
Has this always been your testimony?
I perceived that vehicle to be swerving, and I thought at the time because of the rain it was hydroplaning, but I still wanted to pursue that vehicle to be 100% sure, and that's when the call came in.
Now, Officer Foster, let's go to the actual events. When you got to the accident, you were the first officer to get to the accident scene.
Yes.
And when you got there, you didn't immediately test Mr. Dawson for his sobriety.
I have a victim screaming inside the vehicle with blood all over her. I have another victim unconscious in that vehicle. That's the priority at the time. That's what I'm concerned about.
Now, a few minutes later, after Vanessa's taken away, her mom, Mrs. Sullivan, shows up at the scene.
Yes, her daughter was involved in the car accident. She was there. She arrived.
Now, Mrs. Sullivan, she's the county prosecutor. She's the district attorney.
Yes, she is. That happens to be her job.
And when she got there, she started screaming at you.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
Your Honor, we're using this evidence to show that it is the specific timing that Officer Foster, she was screaming at you.
She wasn't screaming at me. Not at me.
So you're saying that she wasn't screaming at you?
She was screaming at the defendant.
Has this always been your testimony?
She was screaming at everybody.
Does that mean she was screaming at you included?
At what point?
Does everybody include you?
That would include me, yes.
Okay. So she was screaming at you, and she was screaming at the defendant too, you said.
That's correct. And that's,
In fact, she was screaming that she needed evidence for her murder trial.
She's actually not involved in this trial, but yes, she said she needed more. That's
She screamed.
Objection, Your Honor. The state of Midlands, this trial was moved specifically out of Midlands Center because of the district attorney. We've changed venue because the district attorney is not specifically involved in this case.
What's your objection?
My objection is the entire line of questioning is irrelevant.
Overruled.
Now, she was screaming that she needed evidence for her murder trial.
yes, she was.
And that's when you decided to conduct the field sobriety test on Mr. Dawson.
I actually was going to administer them either way. But the point is, when I'm by myself in all that situation, people are stressed out. I had to move that to the priority, and I figured I would do that then, and then move in with my investigation later. So yes, I started administering those then.
Now, let's talk about the sobriety tests themselves. One of the tests you said was to have Mr. Dawson say his ABCs backwards.
Yes, that's the first one that I do with everyone.
And while he was doing that, Mrs. Sullivan was still screaming at him.
I told her to stop, and she didn't hear.
She ignored you when you asked her to stop.
I did.
So she was screaming at Mr. Dawson the whole time he was trying to say his ABCs backwards.
Objection. This is hearsay.
Sustained.
Well, let's talk about some of the other tests that you conducted on Mr. Dawson. One of them was having him stand on one foot and count backwards from 1,000.
Yeah, that was actually the last one that I administered after he had failed the 3 previous ones.
Now the ground was wet.
Yes, it was, but he had already passed. I was just being overcautious and doing a 4th one. At that point,
You're saying
I
that
could have actually taken him into custody after he failed the HGN test, but I wanted to be overcautious.
now to be sure, the ground was wet at the time.
Yes, it was. It had been raining.
In fact, you yourself had just slipped on the same wet ground.
There is a difference between a quick slip because the wet is ground and a difference between somebody stumbling their way through a test.
But you still slipped.
I did take a little slip.
Now, that wasn't where your involvement with the case ended. You did the fatal crash report.
That's correct.
Now, once again, you said that you used the Windsor and Strasbourg report.
I did.
And when you use this report, there's a specific formula you use when you're looking at the impact of the crash.
There are several, actually. There are 3 of them.
Yeah, there are several. In fact, one is for narrow objects, and the other is for wider objects.
They don't limit only to narrow objects. It goes beyond that, so I can't say yes or no to that, if you would allow me to explain.
One of them is for objects with a diameter of less than 24 inches.
That's a specific exception, which didn't apply to this case.
So you used another formula, not the one with the 24 inches limit.
If I may explain, the formula with the variable that you're talking about of 0.6 calls for any kind of object that's less than 24 inches, not 24 inches. Not only that, but you also want to use that if the crash and the damage is not extended through the extents of the vehicle. So that was not the case either. The damage on the side door was at 24 inches, so that does not call for the variable. The damage in the front against the pole was across the entire front of the vehicle. That also does not call for the variable to be used.
I'm sorry, I think you understood the question that I asked. I'm asking that you didn't use the formula that called for the 24 inches or less.
Absolutely not. Well, that's...
Objection. It's asked and answered.
Overruled.
And once again, you didn't use the formula that asked for a diameter of an object less than 24 inches.
Now that I can say yes. For less than 24 inches, no, I did not, because it did not apply.
And once again, the object has to have a diameter of less than 24 inches if you use the formula.
That is one of these stipulations.
Now, one of the objects that the car hit was a utility pole.
That is correct.
Are you saying that the utility pole had a diameter of less than 2 feet?
What I'm saying
Objection
is,
argumentative.
Overruled.
what I'm saying is, even though the pole is less than 24 feet, the damage extended across the entire front of the vehicle, and that is the second aspect that you want to consider in order to use the variable. So it would have been correct for me to use that variable.
Right. And then once again, let's go back to that drag slip real quickly. Right. In the Windsor and Strasbourg primer, it specifically says that a drag slip doesn't simulate the motion of a 3,000-pound automobile.
That is a tire that is full of concrete. That is the best physical test that we can conduct, and I am all for cautious. So I like to be present. I take the measurements myself, and I take the physical examination that I can take, and that is the one available to do that.
Now, once again, I'm not asking why you used the tire. I'm just saying that the primer that you used specifically said that the tire is essentially unreliable.
The primer does say that it does call for some controversies. However, the reason why I used it and it felt within the friction table, it represented accurately what the friction tables call for.
Pass the witness.